Hello. So this is not something I usually do, but I thought I would try doing a bit of a book review today because I just recently finished reading this book that my friend lent me, and it was interesting, and I had a lot of thoughts and also criticisms of it while reading it, to be honest. So I really felt like talking about it. So it's called 15 Dogs by André Alexis, and he's a Canadian author, and the book is set in Toronto, which is actually where I'm from, so that was interesting to find out. And a sort of synopsis of the book is basically these two gods. Oh god, I hope I can remember their names. Hermes and Apollo, yes, are basically in a bar in Toronto at the beginning of the book, and they're talking, and they're kind of thinking about human intelligence, and they make this wager that if any other animal had human intelligence, so like human cognition, they would be even more miserable than humans are. And I believe Apollo was the one believing that they would be more miserable, and Hermes was against that. He was thinking that they would be happy. They could be happy. They bet this for, they wager, I think it was a year or two of servitude to the other, depending on the outcome. And so they're like, so what animal should we give human intelligence to? So they walk outside and they come to a vet clinic, and they walk in, and in the back there's a kennel, and there's 15 dogs in there, and they just decide to give human intelligence to those 15 dogs. And so how the bet works is that at the end of these dogs' lives, if even one dog is happy at the moment that they die, then Hermes would win the bet. Otherwise, Apollo would win if none of the dogs are happy. And so the book basically follows these 15 dogs over the course of their lives, and we see what happens. Pretty much right off the bat, I think 2 or 3 of the dogs are their lives are explained quite quickly, how they go, so they're quickly gone. And then there's sort of a group of dogs that we come to know more about, and then there's sort of a couple dogs, maybe 2 or 3 dogs that we see more, like until the very end of their lives, maybe like 2 primarily. That we see the most of. And it was a very interesting book. It definitely kept me wanting to know what would happen next. I enjoyed the creativity of it, and I know the author wanted to sort of explore like humanity, but kind of through dogs. So like kind of, I felt like while I was reading this, he was sort of like trying to have the reader sort of discover humanity through the dogs sort of discovering this humanity that they had gained, sort of thing, which was interesting. But I think it also is where, from my perspective, a lot of the issues arise. And just a little background on me, I majored in anthropology in university, and that's what my degree ended up being in. But I actually started out in university majoring in zoology, and my first 2 of 5 years were spent studying zoology. So this book was sort of like a combination of those 2 things, because it was dealing with like obviously humanity and what it means to be human in a way, and language was a big thing in the book, which I also studied. I also studied some linguistics in university, and then also because these dogs are biologically dogs, so it had a bit of the like zoology. So it was interesting to me. And I think it gave me a bit of a more critical perspective on this. Before, or like when I think right before I finished the book, I had the idea of maybe doing a bit of a review, and I was curious what other people were thinking about this. So I looked up a couple of reviews on YouTube just to see what people were thinking, and they were very positive, and they kind of what people were saying was kind of like the things that I thought was positive about this book, is the creativity and like the interest of like this premise, and I totally agree. But for me, it kind of bothered me because of the things or the perspectives that I don't know, had coming from my like background, I guess, my educational background and just my interests and stuff. So I wrote some notes as I was reading it. One of the things was the language. So the dogs sort of developed a language that was not English. I think, trying to remember, maybe one of the main dogs in the book learned English, and so we see that they kind of have this ability, and even like they can make the sounds of English, which is interesting. So one dog learned English, and they also created the main kind of group of dogs in the beginning. They developed a language, and one thing that bothered me was that humans did not invent language. Language evolved, and so there's no like one person who created language. I mean, we sort of have the ability to create language, as we see with like J.R. Tolkien, created like Sindarin and whatever for his books and his characters, but that's not how actual languages have come to be. And I just found it a little bit like, I don't know, just it kind of brought me out of it a little bit, because it was too fast for me. It was too fast. Like especially one of the dogs, he even sort of created like poetry, and they created like this wide vocabulary and these things. So that was one thing that bothered me. And another thing that bothered me was the what I'd consider loaded language that was used in the book. So, for example, the male dogs would refer to the female dogs as bitches, and I think the author was trying to go for a bit of like a kind of raw, like gritty feel to the book, but it bothered me because obviously we're reading this in English, and although the dogs were actually thinking in their own language, we're reading this in English, and it was, I don't know that I like that as a choice. Some people might have a differing opinion, because it's technically like the technical term for a female dog, and male dogs were just referred to as dogs, which is technically the term for a male dog, kind of like how lionesses and tigresses have their own term, but male lions and male tigers are just called lions and tigers. But it kind of bothered me because people feel a certain way when they hear those words, and I didn't like it personally. I think another thing was they sort of, there was a scene where one of the dogs, to identify another dog that he was talking about, referred to her as the bitch with the high vagina, and that was totally odd to me. Like, it didn't really serve like a functional purpose, in my opinion. There's so many other ways he could have identified her, and I don't know. I just don't feel that it was necessary or even totally made sense. But yeah. Let me see. Also, another thing to do with language was sort of when the dog characters, eventually interact with humans using language, because one of the main dogs that we follow throughout the book ends up communicating with a human, not to spoil too much, but he learns language and lives with this human. And I liked how the author sort of explored like the misunderstandings between the two, because obviously a human and a dog, even though they supposedly have the same sort of cognition, or like intelligence, as per what the gods did to them, they still had sort of differences in understanding because of their biology and their history, because the dogs grew up as dogs until the point where they were given human intelligence. So I liked the how they depicted that, but I felt that there were some points where it sort of wasn't placed, sort of where there should have been misunderstanding, but there wasn't, or it wasn't. It didn't become an issue. And then let's see. One of the another thing to do with language that I have a bit of a criticism on was the use of the words mutt and master. So kind of the same way as the use of the word bitch, the word mutt, actually in sort of a different way, I felt that it didn't make sense for the dogs to use it. They referred to one of the dogs as a mutt. Like the dogs would refer to him as a mutt. He is in the book, but to me it didn't make sense, because dogs, I don't feel, would have any concept of breed, because dogs are all the same species and they know that. But there was this use of this word, and they didn't refer to any other dogs by a breed name, or as like, they didn't even use like the word like pure or anything like that. It was just the specific dog was referred to as a mutt. And I just thought while reading, how would they know? How would they even know that he was a mutt? There's no way that they could possibly know that, because as humans, we learn about these things, either actively or passively throughout our lives, and we come to understand that there are different breeds of dog, and we understand how that happens, why that's a thing. But dogs would not have a concept of that, especially since these dogs were just given human intelligence and don't have access to, TV and literature and humans who are talking about these concepts. So it didn't really make any sense to me, even like logistically. So even if the author did want to explore something related to like discrimination between breeds, or between pedigree and non-pedigree dogs, there was none of that. None of that was explored. It was just this word was thrown in there. So I didn't like that. And another word that I didn't like the use of was, and even the concept, was the word master. The dogs used the word master a lot in the book, and I felt that it was an odd choice, because it really assumed, I felt, a kind of stereotypical view of dogs, as thinking of humans as their masters, but that view is based on a very human-centric way of thinking of that, because that actually comes from how humans think of themselves in relation to dogs, not as how dogs think about humans. So it was strange. And also, like I said, because they're thinking in their own language, it's a English word that it's a very loaded English word. And yeah, I didn't feel that it was a good choice. This word actually leads into my next sort of theme of like criticisms of the book, which was I didn't feel that the author really understood dog, like canine social behavior, and kind of assumed a incorrect an incorrect view of canine behavior that's based on sort of like alpha theory. But I'm not sure actually if people listening to this will know this, but the whole concept of like alpha, beta, omega dogs or wolves was actually a concept that was created by someone who was observing wolves, but he was observing wolves that were sort of random individuals that I believe were sort of thrown together into this like shared like situation or like shared space. And he observed that behavior, and he actually later was the one who went back and said that he was wrong when he tried to do this sort of experiment, this observation of wolves. And or actually the way that wolves interact in the wild is not based on sort of this linear hierarchy of like alpha at the top that people think about a lot and even sort of use in language, both towards dogs, even towards horses, which is also flawed, and people. But it actually is in the wild. Wolves live in groups where the wolves who maybe have more seniority, who are the parents, who have more like connections or are like more well liked, or these kinds of things, will have more sort of power or leadership kind of ability. It's not based on intimidation and just being the alpha. So the way that these dogs interacted in this book, I felt was not accurate. And I think that was one of the main things that sort of pulled me out of it and bothered me while I was reading it, because it didn't feel real. The dogs would sort of talk about dominance a lot, and they would sort of worry over this idea of a leader, and they had a very linear structure. When there was a main kind of group of dogs in the book, and they had a very linear structure that was based on sort of dominating the dogs below them. I actually wrote a little note after I had written down this criticism and then had looked it up. Like I said, that original sort of theory of like alpha, beta, omega was based on a flawed study. But actually wolves live in family groups. That's the main thing. They work together, and leadership is based on their personalities, seniority, the mentoring of younger siblings. this kind of thing. So it didn't really make sense. The one sort of, I don't know, allowance that I would give the author in this regard is the fact that these dogs technically were random individuals thrown together into this situation. So in that way, I could see that this could in a way sort of represent that flawed study, but I don't feel that that is why the author chose to represent dogs in this book, because it was all that was discussed. Like, I don't think he was thinking about the like sort of true nature, I guess, of dogs in their sort of natural like family groups. I think he was just assuming that this is how all dogs in all situations will interact with each other. There was another slight odd thing with dogs. The dogs who hadn't been given human intelligence, just all other dogs. For some reason in the book, they were often described as being aggressive towards the dogs who had been given human intelligence. And so all these dogs who had been given human intelligence would sort of steer clear of other dogs or have to defend themselves or run away from other dogs because they would just suddenly lash out at them, like if they were in a park or something. And I found this very odd and didn't make any sense. The author sort of described it through the dogs as the way they rationalized it was that the other dogs knew something was different about these dogs with human intelligence. But that didn't make any sense to me because dogs don't react that way. Some dogs might, but most dogs who don't have sort of an emotional or behavioral issue or like a fear issue or something like that, they're not going to react to a human, a cat, even a often strange animal in an aggressive way immediately upon seeing them. So it didn't make sense to me that they just intuitively knew just upon seeing these dogs that something was different and that they should attack them. It didn't make sense. It was very strange to me. There was a couple of nitpicky issues that I had while reading, one of which was that one of the main dogs that we follow throughout the book is a poodle. And this dog also lives with a human. And as I said, we follow this dog till pretty much the very end of the book. And sort of we see his life living with humans. And they explore the author explores kind of the things that happen in this interesting living situation of a human and a dog with human intelligence living together, and the issues and whatnot. But for some reason, never sort of mentioned anything about having to go to a groomer, or which I thought was kind of funny because this is a breed of dog where their hair just grows indefinitely, and this dog would have to go to a groomer. And I thought that was kind of a missed opportunity or an odd thing to leave out. Like, it just never ever came up. I would have felt like it. And also the other issue was that this dog lived for months without human intervention, which was strange to me because, like I said, a poodle's hair grows indefinitely. So this dog would have been just a total mop, and it just wasn't addressed. So, and I think the last thing was that there was a point, and I won't give sort of the details surrounding this, but at one point time stops in the book, and just the student who enjoyed physics in high school and university in me was a little bit bothered because the way that the author described the characters in the book, this moment when time was stopped was that sound was sort of paused. Like it was sort of just this buzz because all the sounds, I guess, were kind of like paused in like the moment, and they were just continuing that same, I suppose, I don't know, frequency or note or whatever. And I didn't like that because sound is waves. It's literally the movement of air particles. That's how we hear sound. So it didn't make any sense to me that if time had stopped, sound could be heard. Because if time stopped, then that would mean that anything that was creating the sound would stop moving, in addition to the air particles that were being moved by whatever that was moving. So how could the air particles move in a wave and hit the eardrum of the character to create that sound, even if it was the same note? It didn't make sense to me, so I didn't like that. A little nitpicky, but that's what happens when you study science, I guess. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you read the book, let me know if you thought of any of these things, or if there was anything else that bothered you, or anything that I didn't mention that you particularly liked about the book. Yeah, it was fun to read. Despite all my gripes, I did enjoy it. So, yeah.